everybody, it's Emily from Schooling, and today I would like to talk about teaching history in the Charlotte Mason homeschool. I'm going to start by saying that I am not by any means a strict Charlotte Mason homeschooler. I think I'm more eclectic than that, and I tend to take bits and pieces from here and there as to what suits what I'm trying to accomplish and what I think works best for my children. So with that in mind, this is the way I teach history. First, I want to talk about choosing resources, because there's a lot out there that you can take from, and some of them are going to be very slanted one way and some of them are going to be very slanted in another way. And that is the way history is. History is biased, and it's really, really hard to find anything that isn't. So the first tip I can give you is to figure out how biased a resource is and if you can work with it or not. Some of them are going to be really slanted, like think of it as reading news sources today. You're going to find news websites that are going to be really one way. They're going to focus on one thing. And you're going to find others that are the other complete direction, and you have to figure out, well, what's the true story between the two? Well, that's the same with history. You have two sides to every event in history, and you're going to have to figure out, well, who's telling the truth and which side was really right, and it's hard. So my advice is to find some good resources that you can use. So for me, for teaching elementary level, I really like the Story of the World series. Now, I know, some people think this is just terrible. Some people think it's too Christian. Some people think it's too secular. Here's what I like about it. I like that it's literary. I like that it's written in a way that children gravitate towards. History can be really dry if you're not careful. It can be really boring. It's about people that lived forever ago, and it feels like, why do we need to care? I like the series because it gives you the history in a palatable way. Yes, some of it is a little skewed one way or the other, but you know what? Then it becomes your job as the parent to add what you want to it. So if you don't believe that the Bible stories should be there, then you can explain that it's mythology. And if you feel like there should be more biblical stuff, then you can add that in. I think as a whole, this series is fantastic for getting kids interested in history, and I like to pair it with a good encyclopedia. And I really like, for elementary level, the Usborne encyclopedia, and it's gorgeous, beautiful illustrations, and it's just snippets of history. This wouldn't work, I don't think, on its own because it doesn't go in depth enough. So you get the depth from the Story of the World, and you get the additional information and pictures from the encyclopedia. And I like to do both together because then I feel like you get the full package. And again, you gotta tweak as you go with any resource. Now for American history, which I usually don't even start until middle school, we dabble with the Story of the World because that does cover American history too. But when you get to middle grade level, I really like the History of Us. Again, same deal. Some people are going to say it's slanted one way, some people are going to say it's slanted another way. It is slanted. All history is. So I like to use this resource because, again, it's really well written. That is the key thing for me when I'm looking for resources, because I know how boring history can get when you're reading from a dry textbook or just an encyclopedia, and you're just like, ugh, more old white men doing things. But this series is really well written, it's really well put together, and again, when you get to things that you think are biased, you can go and look up other information and find out why. I think it's a really important tool for our children to learn that when they think something's not quite right, you go find out what really happened. Find out why it's not right. Learn how to find sources. Learn how to decipher what's true and what's not. Because so many people don't know how to do that. In our day and age, people are so quick to jump on a meme and spread that as fact. And that's not how it works. So teaching our kids that, yeah, history's biased, news is biased, everything's biased, and learning how to find out more about anything. And I think the series is really well done. And when it comes to encyclopedias for middle grades, I really like the Kingfisher encyclopedia. It's a bit more in-depth. I mean, it's still snippets, but it's a little more detailed snippets than the Usborne book. So I think this works better for middle grades. And I also really like to use these for outlining because it gives them a small portion to outline from instead of like, here, outline this 12-page textbook chapter, and this is a lot easier for beginning outlining. In order to get the most out of history, I like to use timelines. And for younger kids, I like to have a big wall one or some kind of like big structure of a timeline that can be out and seen frequently because I think that helps them to see the scope. Younger children don't always grasp like the Egyptians came first and then later was castles in the Middle Ages, and it all kind of bleeds together. So when you have a timeline, it makes it easier for them to see where everything falls. And for middle grades and up, I like to do it in a notebook because they don't really need to see it so much anymore. And it's also a lot easier to store if you have a little less space than some. Like, I don't have a lot of wall space, so right now I'm still trying to figure out where to hang my timeline that we made last year. I have a video all about how I use timelines, so I will link that above for you, and you can go and watch that if you want to know more about timelines. I also like to use history to teach geography, because so much of our understanding of history needs to be built on knowing where places are, and knowing how far apart places are, and understanding where things fall in the world. So I think it's really important to use maps when you're studying history and to go find the places that you're reading about. And I like to give my kids blank outline maps to fill in so that they can like piece together. Like, I think it's really interesting. One of my favorite things is looking at maps of like the ancient world and figuring out where all those like people groups came from. Like, where are Thracians from? And where was Gaul? And all that kind of stuff. So it's really fun to kind of overlay a map of those places on top of a world map today and see where everything kind of falls together. So I think it's really important to be geographically literate and to know where things are. And it just makes everything make more sense, I think, when you know where places are. So always have a map handy as you're studying. I also want to touch on historical fiction, because I think historical fiction gets a really bad rap. I think people assume that it's all fake, or that it's all going to be wrong, and there are books that are historical fiction that do get things wrong, but I think as a whole, historical fiction is an awesome resource because it helps you to kind of be in history. It's one thing to read in a textbook that such and such happened, and it's another thing to be a part of it when you're reading a really well-written historical fiction book. You can kind of place yourself in the moment, and I think that is a really important thing. So some of my favorite historical fiction, I'll just kind of go over a couple. I have tons. I mean, I am a history nerd. I love historical fiction. I'm just going to show you a few. But I really love like Angel on the Square by Gloria Whelan. Gloria Whelan is a fantastic author. Her books are so beautifully written. And this one covers the Russian Revolution from the perspective of a girl who was raised with the royal family. And she's suddenly been pulled from this life that she's always known and thrust into this new world where her ways are wrong, and she has to learn how to adapt. And I think this is just such a well-written book, and it is historically accurate. It's so good. I also want to talk about Mary, Bloody Mary by Carolyn Meyer, and really all of her historical fiction books about the Tudors are so good. And some little things might be a little bit off, but overall, what I love about especially this book is instead of just portraying a character who is typically villainized as a villain, it kind of lets you see, well, how did she become this? And when you step back and realize all the horrible things that Mary had to deal with in her life, from her mother being banished, from becoming bastardized and being thrust away from everything that you've ever known, and told that you can never have any of those things that were promised to you. And it's just all of the things that she had to endure made her what she was, and I think that's really interesting. I love reading things like that, like how did a person get to where they are? But I think this book and all the books that she has written in this, I know there's one on Elizabeth, there's one on Anne Boleyn, so all of those are really good. I also really enjoyed Fever 1793 by Laurie Halse Anderson, and she's another great author. I loved this book because, again, it really puts you in that moment. You get to be there and see what that was like, and it was terrifying to read about this really horrible epidemic that happened right after the Revolutionary War, and everything's coming together, and then bam, everyone starts dying, and it's really kind of terrifying, but it really was great at putting you in the moment, learning about all the little things that would have been happening in like the day-to-day lives of normal people, which I think is so important. It's so easy for history to become focused on those important nobles or presidents or people who were running things, but the world is always populated with lots of people, so I think it's great to be able to read about just regular people and what they had to go through. And this book is such a great resource for that. And I also want to mention one more book, and that is Darby by Jonathan Scott Fuqua. I think this book is underrated. This is what I like to think of as like a younger child's version of To Kill a Mockingbird. It's not quite as It's not the same storyline, but it gives a kind of glimpse into what it was like in that time period to be a white person and to be a black person, and to kind of give that racial backdrop to that time. And this book is about a little girl who wants to be a journalist. She decides she's going to be a writer, and she starts writing newspaper articles about silly, cutesy things that she sees happening around town, and everyone's so pleased, and they think it's adorable until she writes about racial injustice, and then everyone starts freaking out. I think this book is so well done, and it's a great insight into that time period, into how people used to think, into how people still might think, and it's well done, and I really love this book, and I think everyone should read it. And of course, I like to intersperse that with nonfiction too. I like to use books like Bomb, which tells the true story about the building of the atomic bomb and all that happened with that during World War II. And it's nonfiction, but it doesn't read like it. It reads like a really interesting spy novel. I really like resources like that. I love Diane Stanley's biographies. They're gorgeous. I mean, they're seriously just beautiful, and they're also really informative, and they're perfect for like younger to upper elementary level, although honestly I got a lot out of these too, and my older kids and still like reading these. And of course, I know this is out of print, but I gotta plug it. This is Secrets of Vesuvius by Sarah C. Bissell. This book, how I got into history. I had this book when I was about 8 or 9, and I read this thing to pieces. This is a copy that I actually recently found online because I needed it. I needed to own it again. I loved this book so much. This is all about Vesuvius, and it goes back and forth between modern-day archaeological investigations and then a story that they kind of created about people who were living during this event and what it might have been like to have been there. And I was just obsessed from the age of 8, and I was like, I'm gonna be an archaeologist. It made me really want to study more and learn more about history, and I love this book. So how do I put that all together? I like to take and read a chapter or so from our spine book, whether it's Story of the World or History of Us or something else. That is our like focal point for the week or so, and then we read that, and then I pull other resources. So we might be reading a historical fiction that takes place during the time period we're studying, and we might add something to our timeline over the course of the week. We might do a map to kind of learn where that place in the world is, and if I'm feeling really ambitious, we might do some kind of little project to kind of pull it all together. And that's it. I don't usually do projects. I try to keep it simple because honestly, I'm not good with the projects. I'm not really arts and crafty. I read a lot and we talk a lot about what we're reading, and sometimes something will come up that's pertinent to what's happening in the world right now, so that's always nice to pull in. But honestly, I think it's a lot of just reading and talking. and understanding why people did the things they did. And that is what history is all about. So that is how we do history at my house. I'd love to hear from other people. How do you study history in your homeschool? What are your favorite resources? Please share down below in the comments. I'd love to discuss. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you guys in my next one. Happy reading. Bye!